everything. We are going live. So it says anyway. So here we are. Or it looks sort of frozen here, but all right, there we go. That looks better, at least on my end. So good afternoon. This is Dennis Misigoy, Libertarian for the U.S. Senate here in the state of Florida. Here to at least chime in for the week. I don't know that I find quite as many topics, new things to really talk about. I guess I can find a couple. And certainly if we got questions, that'll be even more fun. But just getting everything up and running here in streaming to join you guys and talk a little bit about whatever we can talk about. There's always, still so much going on, but I always like to keep a focus on certain things, and obviously we want to stay with what's relevant and, why we're here and doing this campaign. One thing to do at the start, at least, give a quick shout out to the Libertarian Party in Seminole County. They invited me last weekend on Saturday to come out, and I joined them in Oviedo, they say the locals, at a Taste of Oviedo. I'm sorry guys about that, but came out to the event, the festival out there on Saturday. Got to talk to some voters. There's a couple pictures over here posted, thanks to at least most of those are thanks to Brian Fleming, our region rep over here in Central Florida. I can't remember the region number, so forgive me. but good stuff, good help from the people, and the support from the guys here in the county. I know I had also an invite for the same time in at least two other places where Volusia was doing some work out there at an event, and as well Eric Parker up in Jacksonville, one of our three great candidates that we have up in Jacksonville for city council, was also having an event on Saturday. I haven't heard as much about all the others, but as much as I can and do hear about some of the other events, I'm going to try to relay those as well, so that everybody, even if you're not going to be where I'm going to be in the state, if there's something going on, I do want you guys to get out there and support any other libertarians in the state with the work that they're doing. Obviously, again, each one of us needs help. We all understand kind of the challenge ahead, and as I see people talking about some of the stuff going on, and I'll get to one of the stories, but they talk about, again, taking the approach of going for the lesser evil. Obviously, we understand that that's not good enough, and but we also understand the challenge, because we don't have the big machines behind us the way the old two parties do, that two-party establishment. And I would say two, I like to put quotes around the two. It is what it is. But they have a measure of resources behind them that we don't have, and it's on us to try to break through that wall. But so really, any support you can give to myself or any of the Libertarian candidate makes all the difference in the world. Speaking of, and kind of where I actually saw that was looking at a comment section on a story. Not surprisingly, it's not surprising, but in some sense it's shocking, just because of the numbers and what it looks like and everything. Is a proposal for another increase in the military budget. I think they're looking at $813 billion for the next year. So here's the story. I got a question. Here's the pop culture stuff. The Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. So I've only watched like one clip of it one time. I'm on the fence about whether I think it was staged or not. The one thing that makes me think maybe it wasn't staged is like the whole thing where it looks kind of like Will is laughing at first, and then he has to kind of serious up because it's his wife, and obviously if your wife is the butt of a joke, it's probably not the best idea to laugh. And I think, assuming everything is what it appears to be in terms of like a legit moment, like he really got up unscripted and came up and slapped Chris Rock, it does reflect something poorly. There's certainly other folks who can comment a little bit more in terms of like the cultural impact of having something like that be like the highlight of the night. And again, this is also the guy who ends up winning a big award and then gives a speech after. What does it say sort of about us? Again, comedians are comedians, and it's sort of the nature of these sort of events that they're going to tell jokes, and some of them are not going to quite land as well, and some of them are going to, some of the guests are going to be butts of the jokes, and it's a question of how, I guess maybe a question of how bad you think the joke, although I don't really think any joke should justify, getting up and using violence, but I don't want to overstate the impact of it. Obviously, Chris Rock was handled the situation fairly well. You can say whatever you want about the joke he told, but, at the end of the day, he said whatever he said. Will Smith got up and slapped him, and then the show must go on, as they say, and so he just kind of went along with it and just kept things going. So, but it's sort of a strange thing and a quirk. It's pop culture. So what are you going to do about it? What are you going to say about it? I don't know. I didn't watch the program itself, so it's it's all sort of second and third hand for me. I didn't even watch the speech after, so I didn't even know Will Smith was nominated, by the way, for Best Actor. So I don't think I knew anyone who was never nominated for Best Actor. That's sort of how detached I am from that sort of stuff at this time. So I'm going to spare you guys the pop culture ranting for now, as a guy who, I don't want to say is totally detached from it, but certainly that sort of pop culture I'm not a big follower of. So getting back though to what I'd mentioned about, 813 billion. Okay, so now we went from over 3/4 of a trillion to now we're going to go over 4/5 of a trillion. It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling, and this is at a time, again, 30 trillion in debt. Inflation is what, 8%? I've heard some higher numbers, but I don't know the last. Just from people offhand, I don't know if there's been or at least I haven't had a chance to kind of look at higher estimates, like in sort of official and articles or whatever, people studying and measuring this out. But either way, we're at historic levels already. We've been at, and when's it going to give? Is it going to give? It's certainly not going to give because of them doing stuff like this. Again, I can't overstate this. It's absurd the extent to which the U.S. overspends in terms of military expenses. It's not surprising when you think about the sense that we try to operate, or our government tries to operate, as the policeman of the world, going around and deciding who should be in charge of what. Military bases all over the world, military vehicles patrolling this big beat. Again, the policeman of the world, as we say. Fun fact also, if you're really concerned about climate change, maybe this would be something you want to consider. The United States military on its own is a bigger polluter than 140 entire countries. If it was a country unto itself, it would be in the top 50 polluters in the world. Because again, you burn a lot of fuel patrolling the entire world as the policeman. So everything that goes on and everything that's a part of that infrastructure is contributes to that, but again also contributes to the sort of decline in our standard of living, or the decline in the value of our money. Again, we just can't afford this stuff, and again, we know the last 2 years certainly sent things into overdrive in terms of all that, in terms of how money was managed and what happened to the dollar, or what's still happening to the dollar. We should really say they did pass a 1.5 trillion spending bill not too long ago, where, again, a 2,741 page bill. I believe the House of Representatives had less than 24 hours to read it. Maybe I've got it mixed up and it was less than 2 days. But either way too much to read in way too little time. There's absolutely no way anybody who didn't already have it somehow, there's no way that anybody who didn't already have it or hadn't somehow had access to it when it didn't exist, there's no way anybody could have read it in the time in which it was submitted to the House. So, but still they vote yes for it. And again, that includes the likely Democratic challenger, Val Demings, Congresswoman Demings. And what does it say about her, and what does it say about any elected official who would vote to pass legislation to spend upwards of $1.5 trillion U.S. tax dollars without reading it. There's a certain measure of responsibility you would like to just assume. And I don't think the average American that's not tuned into politics really can appreciate that, because it is so absurd. The idea that you're going to have a bill 2,700 plus pages, they're not even reading it, and they're passing it. $1.5 trillion, they don't even read the bill, and they're passing it, because it's what, the establishment within their parties, their leadership tells them to do. But they're not supposed to be, it's not supposed to be a party leadership that they follow. They're supposed to be representing their districts, representing their states in the case of the Senate. And this just isn't it. Now, and obviously I would say also one of the big thing, they take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. They should be defending the principles on which that's based, and the principles, certainly what I am committed to, is defending the principles of individual liberty, something that does not get a great deal of consideration, obviously, among the legislators that we have today. There's maybe a couple of guys who give it a little bit of thought, but not too much, and certainly not enough. It's something that's got to change, and as I keep saying, that change cannot wait. We cannot keep waiting for others to change their minds, or to do whatever, or to send petitions to say, hey guys, stop doing this. It is utter insanity, and when you compare it to the rest of the world, it just boggles the mind when we're constantly being fed this diet of fear and propaganda through our media and from people in government, and instead you turn around and look at it, particularly where the boogeyman today is Russia, and not for no reason, with Russia invading Ukraine, and also the fact that Russia is, if you want to just look at in terms of the nuclear arsenal that each country has, Russia's the next best thing in terms of their capacity for that, in terms of the size of their nuclear arsenal, largely inherited from the Soviet Union. But that's a thing. But when you look at actually how much are they putting into their military, they're not the ones planning to go around the world and invade every country and decide who's going to be ruling each one. They're doing this on their border. And that's not a justification or defense for them, but I just mean recognition of the constraints of reality and differentiating fact from fiction and propaganda in the sense of what is likely to be the next thing. Okay, they're not going to go about conquering the rest of Eastern Europe, not because even necessarily that Putin's such a great guy or they're so constrained by principles or whatever. They're just not capable of it. They don't have the resources to do it. If you look at how much the U.S. is spending even now on its military, we're talking about over $750 billion in a year, over 760 billion. You compare that to the next country, by the way, in that list is China, and China is at 200 some odd, less than 300 billion. So quite literally, you could take the budget that we have right now, slice it in half, quite literally slice it in half, and we would still not only be outspending every other country in the world, we would be doing it still. The difference between number one and number two would still be over 100 billion. Okay, that's how big the gap is. Other people like to point out, and certainly it's worth pointing out, the fact that as it stands, we're more than like the next 7 or 8 countries combined. And that includes Russia. Russia's in there, but Russia spends less than a tenth, less than 10% of what we spend on our military. And again, maybe that's not necessarily because they don't want to, but simply because they don't have it. Their economy is the size of like Italy or New York State. Can you imagine any one of those funding, global domination? It's absurd. They simply can't do it. And that's one of the things we need to maintain in perspective. Just like the whole, if we had maintained that kind of perspective, excuse me, a couple of decades ago when our politicians were selling us on wars in Iraq, even on going beyond the mission of Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. There's a just the reality of these situations and how we're going to approach it and what we're going to do. And unfortunately, it doesn't enter into the popular consciousness enough. There's not enough voices of reason, unfortunately, and there are some out there. And I really encourage everybody, if you're not already following or listening to, go look at what Scott Horton's doing. I know he's on top of the podcast. I've seen him hitting out in so many places. His appearance on the podcast, Jocko Unraveling. I was just listening to or watching an interview he did on OAN, I think is the network. And, there's just a tremendous amount of insight into what's going on over here. Looking at basically how did we get to this point. And I think you really need to have a certain recognition of that in order to get out of it. But again, what's happening right now is going to be sold as a excuse or a reason or a rationale for continuing to increase this kind of spending, when it makes absolutely no sense. The solution, the way to deal with this problem is diplomacy. It's not by who's got more weapons and is going to drop troops in, because troops are going to become obsolete in an all-out conflict between the U.S. and Russia. It's going to be about firepower and the sort of large-scale firepower. So, this isn't going to be even what makes the difference. But, and I say makes the difference, I don't know what's the difference it's going to make, because nobody's going to win that conflict. And none of us want it. None of us should want it, and it really should, as a lot of other libertarians have stated, it really should be the number one priority in our policy making around this, to avoid open warfare between the United States and Russia, and the catastrophic potential consequences of it, of an open nuclear war. And anyone thinking that there's no way it would happen, people have predicted a lot of things very wrong, and certainly amongst the experts in terms of what the fallout of U.S. intervention and all these other conflicts over the last couple decades in particular. So that's not a good enough guarantee. We really need to turn to diplomacy, and it really shouldn't even be that hard. But I'll take a step away from that, and again, just kind of refocus again that it's just a misallocation of resources. While there is potential for catastrophe, it's catastrophe that we would have to start. They're not going to come and initiate this kind of war to attack us. It would only happen if we cause there to be enough desperation there. And that's really the interesting truth about it, because no matter how much we try to sell it, or I shouldn't say we, I say our media and the political leadership tries to sell us on the idea that this or that foreign leader is a mad dog and crazy and they're going to do whatever. And really none of them are like that. The kind of people who become dictators, I don't want to say are pragmatic, but they're certainly very, very interested in self-preservation. Those are not the kind of guys who strap on the vest with the bombs and just do whatever to be able to harm other people. No, these are guys who want to be in power. They want the trappings that come with being in power, and worst, and at a bare minimum, they want to survive. That is a guarantee, and they will try anything. And the only thing that prevents it either is, again, if we're just unwilling to ever make a deal, and that's obviously happened. I'm not going to be the best guy to recount the history of that, but certainly I think was true in some of our more recent wars, like I said, in the last 2 decades. In particular, Iraq being one of the more dramatic examples where, the leader I'm referring to, Saddam Hussein, pretty much be willing to do just about anything and make any kind of deal to avoid being invaded and toppled. But, that was what we were being sold, regime change. And unfortunately, we've got Biden out there, whether purposefully or, just as a bit of a senior moment, talking about, and now he's doubling down on it from what I've heard, someone's got to get this guy out of power. It sounds a lot like talking about regime change in Russia. And again, if you want to avoid escalation, it seems like the absolute worst thing you could do to suggest that, hey, we're coming for you, man, to the guy who actually might have his finger on the button, who might actually be able to pull the trigger. You want to make those people desperate. It makes absolutely no sense. But because that's the one thing I think, if you put people in a corner and you put a desperation, that's going to be when they're willing to do the worst possible thing and lash out in the worst possible way. And that doesn't benefit anyone. It certainly doesn't benefit the people in Ukraine. It doesn't benefit the people here. Even the military-industrial complex, who is raking it in every year when these hundreds of billions of dollars, even those guys aren't going to win in that scenario. We're all going to lose. And I think it's really important to mention it. And I don't think that let me pivot away, because we're talking about, again, government spending all this money. In particular, in this case, we talked about potential for a military budget over $800 billion next year, for the next fiscal year. We talk about the $1.5 trillion spending bill that was passed by people who didn't read it, and I think as part of that, some of the things that don't really make any sense to be included, and I've heard quite a bit about, has been pushing for federal funding for a lot of this stuff with local police. Now, give me one sec. Now, whatever it's sold as, again, this is an absolutely terrible idea for a number of reasons, and I'm gonna kind of go down. I'll just go down to the most obvious thing. If the federal government is the one providing the money for the local police, that money always comes with strings. All the federal money that comes down to local government, be it the police or the and what are the strings that it's going to come with? And when it comes to having strings attached to that money, what are we going to do, or how's that going to influence the behavior or the priorities of police departments, of local police departments? Now, instead of, again, focusing on the local community that is dictating policy and getting to their priorities, now we've got federal priorities because it's going to be tied to the federal money. And maybe there's an assumption that this is all going to be well-meaning and deal with police reform and stuff. I wouldn't be so naive. If the people in the federal government, Congress, and the president were serious about wanting to actually bring some real reform, they would step up and do some of the things that we libertarians have been talking about for quite some time. End qualified immunity, end civil asset forfeiture, end no-knock raids. You could make each one of those things. You could do those things. Because we do set the parameters, and that may seem like a sort of overexpansion of the federal government's power at a glance, perhaps. But when you think about what we already do within the Constitution in terms of limiting and setting those parameters for for how government interacts with the people and respect for individual rights, the fact that we do have, coming from there, protection of due process, protection of your life, liberty, and property, that should cover a lot of these things. The fact that the police shouldn't be able to, or from search and seizure, no-knock warrants for no-knock raids really shouldn't fit into there. And we should be able to say from the top down in that case that this isn't something that's consistent with the values that we have and our respect for individual rights. Certainly not a respect for individual property, and obviously the trade-off that's being made in terms of human safety with all the tragedies that we've seen come out of them, particularly in the recent past. We should be able to understand that that's something we want to get rid of. Civil asset forfeiture is another no-brainer. It's legalized theft, done under the guise of we don't want criminals to be able to have their resources. But the problem is that it's made it's removed so many of the constraints on police taking control of people's property, that it's pretty much meaningless. And again, I guess it's worth always remembering that one of the big the big guy who pushed it at the federal level to make this sort of a thing, let's say, was Joe Biden himself as a U.S. senator, coming up in the 70s and 80s, always trying to prove how tough on crime he was, and obviously that's something they still want to do. It's funny because there was such an outcry. I can't really pinpoint you to say who it was, all the defund the police stuff, but obviously folks like the president himself, and obviously Congresswoman Demings as well, are very much on board with fund the police, give them more money. And she was bragging, I saw recently, about spending money on more modern body cams. And look, I'm all happy for police to be using body cams. I think that they should, but I don't know that the problem or the issues that we've been facing with them is that we need new generation of technology or more advanced ones. What we need is, again, the proper sort of reforms guarantees that the public will have access to the footage from those body cams. All too often we have body cam footage from these controversial incidents, these really dangerous, harmful interactions between civilians and police. And what ends up happening, we end up not having access to the body cam footage, or when it comes out so much later that I don't want to say lose impact, because you never lose impact. If you ever watch the videos such as the body cam footage from the Daniel Shaver killing, where he was murdered, the dash cam footage from the Philando Castile murder, all these kind of cases, these things are kept away from the public until after they're able to get away from not having charges. The public outcry isn't there when there's a real opportunity for there to be criminal charges. And even in many cases where civil cases are attempted and these guys are found to be not responsible at all, then we see what actually happened in the public. Again, I think the public has a know, particularly as we are the taxpayers. The taxpayers have a right to know how their money's being spent. The police are, in principle, supposed to be working for us as the people. They're supposed to be protecting and serving us. So I think it's very important for us to be able to know what it is they're actually doing, just as with any other government arm, government agency. The American people, the taxpayers, have a right to know what they're doing in our name and with our money. And I'm trying to think, what was the other one? Well, we got no-knock raids, we got civil asset forfeiture, and qualified immunity. That again goes all into that, the protection from any sort of personal liability. Anyone for any sort of misconduct always should be held accountable. Let's put it that way. There's never a situation where misconduct should be permissible. If it wasn't misconduct, then we should trust the system, or at least try to improve our system to the point where we can more reliably get away from people being wrongly held accountable. Although I think that's much less likely in this sort of scenario. But all the same, we got to do the best that we can with it. But those are examples of real reforms. Sending more money for new equipment and maybe for some sort of training. But again, I'm really curious as to what the kind of content of that training would be. And again, what would be the likely impact it would have in those kind of real tough situations where we've seen so many tragedies occur, particularly over the last decade. Now, these things and more are part of why, again, I'm trying to do this in terms of running for the U.S. Senate. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up now, but I'm going to look forward to talking to you guys again next week. It is the end of the month, so it'll be next month as well when I speak to you guys again. Thank you guys for tuning in and watching this stream, and I look forward to talking to you guys again soon. All right? Take care, everyone. I'll see you then.